Hi, good morning. So it's quite some time since I met you last on linguistics. Okay, so this is probably the last class, online class that you will be having before you go for the exams. And I've already sent you quite a number of files on Chomsky's contributions to linguistics. And I believe now you are quite well up in the area. So I'm just kind of winding up what you have already seen, what you've already tried to read, watch and understand. Right. So if you have queries, if you want more discussions, please WhatsApp me. Right. So what exactly was Chomsky doing, you might ask? Well, I would say that Chomsky was trying to overturn structuralist linguistics, okay, to kind of critique it entirely, looking at its lacunae, the gaps in structuralist theoretical formulations, and then go on to propose alternate theoretical paradigm. This is exactly what Chomsky was doing. So how and in what context? So before I talk about Chomsky's linguistics, let me make one thing very clear. All the inquiries into linguistics till Chomsky's time can be described as phrase structure grammars. So what are phrase structure grammars, or what are phrase structure theoretical paradigms? Well, phrase structural theoretical paradigms look at the structure of language, take it apart, okay, take a sentence apart, find out its components, tell us what this structure can imply. Okay, you have subject, verb, object, or subject, object, verb. Ram killed Ravan. Raman Ravanane konnu. So this structure is analyzed. You are told that it has a subject, a predicate, a subject, and a verb, an object. Or if you have Ram killed Ravan in the jungle, you have a complement. You have two objects. My father gave me a pen. My father gave me some good advice, where you have two objects, me and advice, sound advice. So you are told all this. You are told to look at the structure of any utterance, or the compendium of structures, okay, collection of structures that you can find in a language. This is exactly what structuralist linguistics. And you know what Sosho said. Sosho talked about signifier, signified, and the composite structure that it makes called sign. So you know all these. So the fundamental question is, if you have what looks like the same structure, okay, and if you have two sentences with apparently the same structural properties, but which differ substantially in what they communicate. So Chomsky's famous example is, John is easy to please and John is eager to please. Look at the sentences. You have John, you have a copula is, and you have a complement. Eager to please, easy to please. Right? So we know that these two sentences are very different from each other. In fact, there is a linguistics dissertation called The Syntactic Structure of John is Easy to Please. Probably you haven't seen it. It's a very small dissertation, interestingly. I saw it once. I didn't take a copy, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would have told you more about it. Right. So, this thesis, in fact, uses Chomskyan paradigms to discuss how apparently similar sentences differ in their senses, in meaning. Right. Then, you also know that phrase structure grammars employed such devices like immediate constituent analysis. Right. You take a sentence, divide it into two. It's called parsing. Parsing means dividing. Okay. You divide it into two. Okay. Ram killed Ravan. You have Ram, then killed Ravan. Okay. One way of parsing it. You can also have Ram killed plus Ravan, etc. So immediate constituents. You can draw a tree. Okay. You can take a tree and label each branch. So how do you do it? You have a sentence like the Chomsky's famous example. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Apparently a nonsensical sentence. And you can make a tree out of it. Okay. With different branches. Colorless sleeping ideas can be put up as one branch. Okay. Colorless green ideas. Second branch, sleep furiously. You can further divide them. You can divide these two parts further. Colorless green ideas, one node each, 3 nodes. Sleep furiously, 1, 2 nodes. So on. So what you are doing is essentially an analysis of given structures. You don't know anything about how different ideas can be communicated by the same structure. How different senses can be communicated by the same structure. So this will immediately take you to what Chomsky said later. There are 2 kinds of structures, deep structures and surface structures. So in essence, what conventional grammars did was to look at only the surface structure. As I said, you can draw a tree. You can put one word at every node in the branches. Okay. You can cut sentences into immediate constituents. So Chomsky had a problem here. So he knew that apparently similar sentences, okay, which appeared to follow the same pattern, may have very different sensations. Right. And he also thought of what are called transformations. Like, for example, you have a sentence, the dog bit the man. You transform it into the man was bitten by the dog. So we call one of the sentences an active voice sentence and the other a passive voice sentence. So Chomsky said we should know how this transformation takes place. So as you know, his grammar is called transformational grammar. Okay. Transformational generative grammar, he said. So I'll come to the generative part later. But first, the transformational aspect of language. You can transform one sentence into another. You can have a tag question, for example. I didn't eat any lunch, did I? I didn't do anything to you, did I? Okay. The sky looks terribly cloudy, doesn't it? Etc. etc. So these are tag questions which you attach to statements. Okay. So how do you have tag questions? Tag questions are one form of transformation. So if you say the sky looks terribly cloudy, the tag question must invariably have the particle, the auxiliary verb does. But suppose I say, I look a sorry picture. Probably I'm dirty looking. I haven't taken a bath. I haven't washed my face. Okay. I have mud splattered over my shirt. So I say, I look a terrible picture. So the tag question must have not does, but don't I? I look a terrible picture, don't I? So these are transformations. These are transformations which are affected to individual sentences. So Chomsky said, unless you know how the sentences, any particular sentence can be transformed, you don't know much of linguistics. Okay. So this is probably the most important contribution of Noam Chomsky. What he did was to overhaul traditional linguistics by stating that transformations and also generative patterns, okay, are important, are the most important things in a language. So instead of analyzing, taking apart a sentence bit by bit and telling us what each is, this is a subject, this is predicate, this is NP, this is VP, etc., one must be able to say how this particular sentence is transformed, or why two apparently similar looking sentences have different senses, right? So this is one thing, the kind of analysis that Chomsky was looking at. Okay, fine. One more important thing. Okay, suppose I say something like, doesn't look like it. Is it clear? No. What am I talking about? But if you say, it will rain today, sir, I'll say, it doesn't look like it. The sky is not cloudy enough. Okay. There is just a small overhanging set of clouds which don't look like rain clouds. So you can't expect rain this evening, I'll say. This is what I mean. So it doesn't look like it. Okay, what I'm trying to say is the sky doesn't look as if it will rain today evening. That's what I mean. So Chomsky also propounded a notion called null set or null item. Okay. Zero morpheme, for example. That is, the morpheme is there, but it is not visible. Okay. So in many sentences which Chomsky wrote, he marked certain areas in the sentence with a zero. Okay. So what does this mean? This means that there is something there, but it is not visible. So this exactly connects to Chomsky's idea of deep structure and surface structure, right? Did you get the idea? So when I said doesn't look like it, or got to be careful, again, what does it mean? It is always attached to some other sentence, some other context which is not immediately visible. So when I take you for an excursion and you want to skydive, okay, buggy dive, whatever you call it, okay, you take it high up and then you dive on a glider or a parachute. Okay. And I say, all right, you can take a buggy ride, but you gotta be careful. Okay. I won't even say you. Gotta be careful. Take my word. So gotta be careful or got to be careful, I mean it's you got to be careful. Subject is deleted. But the subject is there. You know I'm talking to you. So this is another wonderful idea. A piece of language that you see need not involve everything that is visible or on the surface, or to use Chomsky's terminology, surface structure. Okay. The surface structure is not everything. You have to analyze deep, you have to look at how the sentence has been transformed. Alright. So earlier in his career, Chomsky also formulated something called kernel sentences. Okay. kernel sentences. In Malayalam you can say Kadalaya Vachayangal, okay, or core sentences, core patterns. Okay, so we can talk about core patterns like subject, verb, object, subject, verb, object, complement, or subject, verb, object, direct object, indirect object, SVO, OD, I, indirect object, direct object. So these can be taken as kernel patterns. So Chomsky formulated a number of kernel patterns. Okay, he would use those symbols or codes: NP plus VP, noun phrase plus verb phrase, and he would further divide NP and VP. NP can be determiner plus N, noun. The dog, the is determiner, dog is noun, etc. Okay, so he would say that these, if you pause it, if you kind of produce such patterns, you can generate all the sentences of a language. So this is probably a weak point. People might ask you, have you discovered all the patterns that exist in the language? It's not humanly possible. It's not humanly possible to look at all the sentences in a language. Maybe there are patterns which have not yet been discovered. Okay, a very famous linguist, I think it was Zelig Harris, in 1941 he recorded thousands of hours of telephonic conversation, of course with the permission of the telephones department, and he tried to formulate his grammar on the basis of those sentences which were actually used by people, right? So this looks slightly odd, doesn't it? Can you say that all the possible patterns were used by people in these conversations? I don't know. I wouldn't say. I wouldn't say that people used all the possible, even if the conversation, recorded conversation, stretched to 3,000 or 4,000 hours. So this is not a very substantial idea of Chomsky's, that you have a grammar which will generate all the possible sentences of a language. I don't know. You remember the actor Innocent in a film saying, in response to an answer on what the subject was studying, she said, medicine. And Innocent said, ഞാനതല്ല ചോദിച്ചത്, നീയൊക്കെ എന്തിനാ പഠിക്കുന്നത്? So എന്തിനാ പഠിക്കുന്നത്? The answer, immediate ready answer is medicine. But what Innocent wanted to know was എന്തിനാ പഠിക്കുന്നത്, which is something very different. So this would show that all the apparently possible sentences of a language have not yet been discovered. There are still some patterns which people will discover on the way. It's impossible to record or analyze language fully. But it is possible to offer a number of patterns which you find. It is possible to account for language by looking at these what Chomsky calls transformations. So I would say that this is where Chomsky differed fundamentally from his predecessors. Excuse me. In talking about analyzing language, not in terms of sentences that you find ready-made, okay, but also in terms of sentences which are transforms of other sentences. Okay. So not treating all sentences the same way, but treating some sentences as transforms. Taking one of the two pairs as the base form. Okay. So a question is a transform according to Chomsky. The normal thing is the declarative or assertive sentences. Okay. So I didn't tell you anything. This is a statement. Question can be, did you tell me anything? Or did you tell them anything? Okay. Or a tag question. You didn't tell them anything, did you? So these two are transformed sentences. Sentences which are the transforms of other sentences. Right. So this is fundamental. This is fundamental in linguistic thinking. How Chomsky's ideas differ fundamentally from those of his predecessors, from phrase structure grammars. Phrase structure grammars which only try to analyze the sentence independently and offer theories to account for them. Labeling particular items in a sentence as subject, verb, object, determiner, participle, preposition, context, whatever label that you want to find. So all grammars from the grammar of Zeno, the Greek linguist of the 3rd century BC, to Saussure, the nearest major linguist to Chomsky. So this is what Chomsky meant. Okay? So this is one of the fundamental revolutions that Chomsky effected. So let us look at some other of his theories. Chomsky's theory of language acquisition. Here is a fundamental contribution of Chomsky's. He argued that language is innate. It is biologically inherited by people. It is here, not outside. You don't learn language by imitating what other people say. Okay. That would mean that you will have to listen to every possible sentence that people speak. No, you don't do that. Chomsky says language is already embedded in your brain, and we call his theory a rationalist theory of language. So how exactly do we acquire language? We acquire language by receiving clues from our surroundings, whether it is your parents or people in the neighborhood or anybody whom you hear. And this piece of language that you hear on one fine morning when you are a child, it kind of activates the language acquisition device in your brain. This is what Chomsky says. There is something called language acquisition device in your brain. So when you hear somebody speak, it activates this device. And your brain works, analyzes language. Okay. And when you hear, "Here comes Papa," the title of that famous painting by Raja Ravi Verma. Right. The child, without anybody prompting it, will say, using this sentence as a base, he'll say, "Here comes Mummy." So what does it mean? The child has already analyzed the sentence. The child now knows that there is an NP and a VP in it. Okay. In a form of transformation. "Here comes Papa." Not "Papa is coming." "Papa is coming" is a more normal sentence. But Mummy says, "Here comes Papa." And immediately the child knows it's a transformed sentence. Okay. Say there is a deep structure. Papa is coming. So the next day when the child sees Mummy coming, the child will use the structure which it has learned the previous day and will say, "Here comes Mummy." Of course, the children might make mistakes on the lexical items. I have told you this already. They make errors. Like, for example, when they see a verb like in Malayalam, chinduga or veeluga, okay, tooipovuga. When mother is feeding you and you are careless and some rice spills onto the mother, ayyo mone choru tooipoi, okay, or choru chindipoi. The child will take this as a verb which means fall down from a higher position. It can be a plate, it can be a saucer, it can be a cup, whatever. And the next day when it is given a pappadam, it will say, when it's supposed a piece of it falls away, it will say, Amme pappadam tooipoi, alle pappadam chindipoi. Okay. So, which is not what we use in Malayalam. So the lexis the children might get wrong. That's what Chomsky says. Children never make structural mistakes. Rarely, if at all. The child must be a cretin or something like that. Otherwise, the child will never make a grammatic. What it makes are lexical mistakes. Okay. So, for example, a child will never say, Amme chindi pappadam poi, which is ungrammatical. Okay, he'll say pappadam chindi poi, or the milk is spilled, or the cat drank the milk, etc. All these are grammatically correct sentences. The child won't say drank cat the milk. Did you get it? So this means that this is inbuilt. Right. So therefore, and closely related to this theory of acquisition of language, LAD, is the Chomsky's idea of universal grammar. These two things must be taken together. So what is universal grammar? Universal grammar is the set of properties which are common to all languages. So what are some of these properties? Yeah, one of the things I already told you. Questions. All languages have ways of asking questions. All languages have divisions of sentences into subjects and predicates. All languages have grammatical categories like nouns and verbs. All languages have elliptical sentences. Elliptical sentences are sentences which are truncated or shortened forms of full sentences. So I give you an example. Gotta be careful. Watch it. So when somebody is lighting a cracker, bursting a cracker, watch it. You'll burn your hands. All these are what are called truncated or elliptical sentences. Churikki parayum. Right. So Chomsky would say that such elliptical sentences, the property of languages to make elliptical sentences, to transform sentences from one category to another. Active voice transformation I have already referred to. So these are properties which are common to all languages. There are a number of properties. But at the same time, some properties are not common to all languages. For example, grammatical gender. We discussed this in the context of history of English. Old English was a highly gendered language. Hindi, one of India's official languages, is a gendered language. You have to say, if I will say, मैं वादा करता हूँ. If you are a girl, you will say, मैं वादा करती हूँ. So this is the gender difference. If you are a woman subject, if you are a feminine subject, proper way to say it is feminine subject, the form of the verb changes. So this is not a universal grammatic property. It is used in some languages, not in others. Right. Subject deletion, that you can write a sentence without a subject. Very common in Malayalam, but not available in English, except for elliptical sentences. Subject deletion is not allowed. Okay. Similarly, concord, all the tenses in a particular sentence have to match. Okay. In a reported sentence, for example, in English, somebody says, I will help you. But when you report it, you say, he said that he would help me. So the will becomes would. The subject actually said, I will help you. When you report it, you change it to would. So this is called concord. This is not a universal linguistic property. So if you read Chomsky's books, you will be told, you'll know that some properties of languages are common across linguistic families. Okay, so common that you can when you learn a new language, you can expect to find it there. So when you learn a new language like Russian, you don't know Russian. Definitely you'll know that Russian will have subject and predicate. Russian will have noun and verb. Russian will have transformed sentences. Okay. Russian will have deep structure and surface structure. You know all this. Okay. Now, I'll come to the next idea. Okay, all right. If you say that languages have what is called universal grammar, properties which are common to all languages, what exactly happens when you hear Malayalam or Hindi? Chomsky says you are just switching on one of the many possible switches. There is Malayalam, there is Hindi, there is Tamil, there is French, there is Turkish, there is Bangla, there is Spanish, there is Arabic, so many languages. So you imagine them to be a switchboard on your wall. When you listen to Malayalam, closely follow this, you are only learning individual words. Without individual words, you can't speak. Even if the language is embedded in your brain, you have to get a cue. So therefore, you have to know that what you find in the plate is what we call choru, and what you pour into it with a ladle is curry or sambar or whatever. What you nibble, what you pinch from the plate is a piece of fried fish. Okay, so you have to know all these words. മീൻ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ എന്താണെന്ന് അറിയണം, സാമ്പാർ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ എന്താണെന്ന് അറിയണം, ചോറ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ എന്താണെന്ന് അറിയണം. ഇതൊക്കെ കേട്ടിട്ടേ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് കിട്ടുള്ളൂ. There is no other way you can. This is not embedded. But this is the most important point. ചോറിൽ കറി ഒഴിക്കും എന്ന് പറയണമെങ്കിൽ ചോറ് കറി ഒഴിക്കുക എന്നുള്ളത് കിട്ടണം. പക്ഷെ ഇത് it is to be joined in this string. ചോറിൽ കറി ഒഴിക്കും. Okay. Once you get this string, you can simply change the individual items to make other sentences. Okay. അപ്പോൾ വിസ്കിയിൽ സോഡ ഒഴിക്കൂ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ചായയിൽ പാലൊഴിക്കൂ എന്നൊക്കെ പറയാം. Because you are using the same pattern. This pattern, this is one of the many patterns which are embedded in your brain, Chomsky would say. So when you listen to Malayalam, you immediately realize that Malayalam follows one of these patterns. ഇതെല്ലാം മലയാളത്തിലില്ല. മലയാളത്തിൽ ഈ പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ it can be a subject object verb sentence or a subject verb object sentence. But you discover when you listen to it for a few minutes, you discover that it's a subject object verb sentence. Right, finished. So you don't have to listen to a similar sentence again to learn it. You rationalize or you use your thinking, critical faculty to make another sentence. Okay. ചോറിൽ കറി ഒഴിച്ചു, വെള്ളത്തിൽ മറ്റേ ചായയിൽ പാലൊഴിച്ചു, ഇതുപോലുള്ള സെൻറ്റൻസ് ഓൺ ദി അനാലജി ഓഫ് ദ ഫസ്റ്റ് സെൻറ്റൻസ്. അപ്പോൾ the very interesting idea here is that Chomsky did not know when he first proposed this theory that all human languages are descended from a proto-language. I think I told you this in the class. So how did this happen? This was a discovery made not by linguists but by genetists, who found that all Homo sapiens means us, we, humans, who now have people almost all parts of the world. So we are of the same racial stock. We are descended from the same forefathers. Okay, this is all right. The second part of the equation, that when we started migrating, when our ancestors started migrating from Africa to all parts of the world, they had what? Language. So if they had language, and if their descendants migrated to all parts of the language, they were taking this proto-language with them and modifying it. Okay. So this discovery was made a little later, after Chomsky proposed his universal grammar theory. Now it's clear. It's now clear why there is something called universal grammar. Obviously, we started off there. However much we changed, we started off as one single linguistic community, speaking the same language. So look at the biblical myth on languages. According to the Bible, at one time in the past, all human beings spoke the same language, and they were a very united community. So they had this crazy idea: why don't we build a tower to heaven, okay, so that we'll reach there. We can go there and see God directly. So this is not something that God would tolerate. So what did he do? He confused their languages, according to the Bible. So I couldn't understand what you said. So the project of building a tower collapsed. So how can you build a tower if you can't communicate with each other? So this is the biblical story. So whatever the story, it is true that in a distant past, according to genetics, some 70,000 to 1 lakh years ago, all human beings spoke the same language. So this scientific discovery was made after Chomsky proposed this theory of universal grammar. Right. Now, this would imply that all these grammatical properties are embedded in your brain, as well as all the possible grammatical properties, on the way. Some languages have grammatical gender, some don't. Some languages follow the SOV pattern, others follow the SVO pattern, still others follow the VSO pattern. Okay, so this has to be specified, and once you hear the SOV pattern at home, spoken by your parents or neighbors who speak Malayalam, then you know this is the pattern that you must follow if you want to converse with them. But wait a minute. Suppose a child comes into contact with somebody who speaks English or Spanish or French. All these languages follow the SVO pattern. So is the child confused? No. Chomsky says the child won't be confused. The child will simply grasp it as another parallel system. Right. So when the child speaks Malayalam, he'll use SOV. When the child speaks English, it will use SVO. So children are able to learn a large number of languages in childhood. Okay. And Chomsky said once the child grows older, when it reaches the age of, let us say, 14, it will no longer be able to learn or new language, or it will find it very difficult to learn a new language because it has become accustomed to certain patterns which it uses every day or at least occasionally. So to grasp a new pattern becomes difficult. So Chomsky made this very clear. A child will never make a grammatical mistake, even if it makes a lexical mistake. So, it will say, for example, when it says a jeep, a pickup, it will say a car. Or when it sees a bus, it will say a van, etc. These are lexical mistakes. Chomsky would say that they are trivial. It doesn't show. But when the child has a problem in uttering a grammatical sentence, here comes the thing. So if it changes the word order, for example, if it says, instead of saying, I don't like ice cream, suppose it says, I ice cream like don't. This is an ungrammatical sentence. So it has a certain problem in reproducing, in producing a character. Then it suffers from a linguistic disorder. Right. So this is a very interesting idea, Linguistic orders like this, but what's called aphasia, grammatical aphasia. Okay. Obey talked to you about aphasia in psycholinguistics. So then, of course, the child has a problem. Okay. Now, moving on from here, let us look at Chomsky's ideas on competence and performance. Already you know about langue and parole. Okay. Langue and parole are Saussure's terms. Okay. Langue is the available, let us say, repository of language. It contains all the possible sentences, all the possible lexemes. So this is a stock out of which an individual uses only a very small part, which is called the individual's performance, parole, according to Saussure. So these two terms are virtually identical. These two pairs of terms, langue parole by Saussure and competence performance. Competence simply means this is clearer actually. Competence would mean that a person and the individual is competent to speak, to use all the possible structures of a language, all the possible sentences, all the possible lexemes, etc., etc. But in practice, an individual uses only a few of these structures. As I said, nobody can claim a complete mastery of a language, or you can probably claim a mastery in terms of producing it. Okay, if you come across a lexeme, you can definitely produce a language because the competence. But for a linguist to say that these are the sentence patterns of the language and there are no other, I don't think it will work. because this lang or the base of competence, ഭാഷ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ അത്രയും വലുതാണ്, എന്തൊക്കെയോ അതിനകത്തുണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ നമുക്ക് വിചാരിച്ചാൽ അതൊക്കെ ഉപയോഗിക്കാൻ പറ്റും. ബട്ട് ഫോർ എ ലിംഗ്വിസ്റ്റ് to analyze all those things in a lifetime, I don't think it's possible. Not one linguist. Hundreds of linguists working on a same language very systematically using computers and the like will find that after they complete the work, they'll find that still there are a few patterns which are becoming visible. We didn't see those things when somebody utters a new sentence. Or, more importantly, linguistic change. Language changes. You can't think of a language remaining same, which is why there are so many languages in the world. From a proto-language, we have moved on into something like 7,000 languages. Currently, some languages have died out. So there are at least 7,000 clearly recognizable languages in the world. So in India alone, we have around 200, roughly. Okay, there are many more languages in our neighborhood. In Pakistan, Bangladesh. In Pakistan, there is a Dravidian language called Brahui. I told you once, closely related to Malayalam or Tamil. It's a Dravidian language. So many languages. But all these languages have developed come into their own because there is something called language change. So a group of people, once they separate from their parent group and move on and live somewhere else, their language would change over a period of time. So the linguists have even proposed a systematic pattern of change, giving us the number of years in which a language left on its own changes into another. So we know all this. So competence and performance, two important concepts of Chomsky's, are linked to Lang and Barrow, Saussure's concepts. Right. Now, coming to deep structures of, I've already mentioned that. The only problem I find is that you can't always think of pairs like this. Okay. Probably you can give a rewriting. Okay. If you have a confusion about two sentences, okay, they look the same on the surface, you can clear it up by rewriting those sentences. Okay. John is easy to please. John is eager to please. Two of Chomsky's famous examples. Now, in John is easy to please, who is pleasing? Certainly not John. The subject of the sentence is somebody else. So I am saying you can also say, okay, Sharif Master is easy to please. Okay. I am not the one who pleases. One of you tries to please me. Okay. On the other hand, you can also say Sharif Master is eager to please. Okay. കുട്ടികളെ സന്തോഷിപ്പിക്കാൻ വളരെ എപ്പോഴും തയ്യാറായി നിൽക്കുന്ന ആളാണ്. Which may or may not be true. But in any case, when you say I am eager to please, I am the subject. I am trying to please you. So how do we resolve this issue? Phrase structure grammars used to resolve such issues by immediate constituent analysis. Okay. They would analyze the sentence, John is easy to please. Okay. And John is then easy to please. So they'll parse it, they'll try to make some sense out of these two pieces. Or in sentences like old men and women. Okay. It can mean two things. One, old men and women. Or old men and women. So you attempt to parse it, cut it into pieces, And here we have another method. Rewrite these sentences. Okay. So I can say, it is easy to please John. And John is eager to please others. Crystal clear, no problem. So this is what deep structure and surface structure means. Okay. There is a deep structure to everything. Why? Instead of deep structure, you can say there is a transform to any sentence which can disambiguate. Disambiguate means to clear ambiguities. If you have a problem in understanding the sentence, you can simply rewrite it and you get the intended sense. If you have a problem with the sentence. If you are happy with these transforms, fine. You don't have a problem. Somebody learning English might find these two sentences a problem. John is easy to please and John is eager to please. So you rewrite these sentences. So I think this can account for a number of ambiguities in language. Simply rewrite it. Okay. Police Mardanam and Dalit Mardanam, famous examples in Malayalam. In the first case, it is the police who kind of tortures people. In the second case, it is Dalits who are tortured by upper caste. You get such news items every day. So you rewrite the sentence. Police in de Mardan. Okay. Absolutely correct. Dalitarkku nereyundaya Mardanam. Right. You rewrite the phrase. It becomes very clear. So this is one important aspect of transformational generating grammar. On the one hand, you can generate all the sentences, as Chomsky claimed. I have looked at it already and said that it might not be possible. Forget that. But at least if you have some patterns, you may be able to generate a large number of sentences. Almost all, you can say. Fine. Also, if you have a given sentence, it's possible to transform it into another sentence and to find out the properties which made this transformation possible. And I have already told you about what Chomsky described as null item, nil item, zero item, where the item is not visible, but it is there. ഒരുമാതിരി നമ്മൾ ഭൂതകാലം സിനിമയിൽ കണ്ടമാതിരി ഒരുമാതിരി പ്രേതങ്ങളാണ്. പക്ഷെ ഭൂതകാലത്തിൽ തോന്നലാണ്, ഇവിടെ തോന്നലല്ല. ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ദെയർ, ഇറ്റ്സ് നോട്ട് വിസിബിൾ. ഓക്കെ, ബട്ട് ഇറ്റ് ഡസ് ഇറ്റ്സ് വർക്ക്. അതാണ് പല സിനിമയിലും കണ്ടിട്ടില്ലേ, പ്രേതങ്ങൾ അതിൻ്റെ പണിയൊക്കെ ചെയ്യും. പട്ടണത്തിൽ ഭൂതം എന്നൊരു സിനിമയുണ്ട്, ഇന്നസെൻ്റ് അഭിനയിച്ച. ഇപ്പം ഇന്നസെൻ്റ് പല കാര്യങ്ങളും ചെയ്യും. മേശപ്പുറത്ത് സാധനം എടുത്ത് മാറ്റും. ഇന്നസെൻ്റ് ആരും കാണുന്നില്ല. Nobody sees him. He's a ghost. Right. So, nil items in language. I already given you examples. When you say, gotta watch it, what I mean is, you have got to watch it. So, the you is there. It's an imperative sentence, but it's not visible. You have got to watch it. So, this particular idea of Chomsky is that a sentence might contain elements which are not visible, which are placed there to make sense, right? So I think we have looked at almost all the important theoretical formulations of Chomsky, starting off with rewriting, generation of sentences, universal grammar, competence and performance, deep structure, surface structure. One more. Acceptability and grammaticality. What exactly is this? So here, Chomsky has Chomsky has trodden on an important principle of language. A language, a particular sentence can be grammatical. its grammar would be perfectly alright. Okay. Nobody will find any fault with it. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Chomsky's famous example. But this sentence won't be acceptable. Why? We mustn't say that it is an absurd sentence. We can say, colorless green ideas don't sleep. We must say that the verb sleep is not collocated with colorless green ideas. അതിൻ്റെ കൂടെ പോവില്ല. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. You can say the dogs sleep furiously in the afternoon. It's so hot. Fine. No problem. But colorless green ideas don't sleep. Like colorful, pretty ideas. Even if the ideas are colorful, they don't sleep. So you don't associate the word sleep with ideas, whether they are green or red. So that's what Chomsky called an unacceptable sentence. Okay. So the traditional description was of correct and wrong sentence. We don't accept this distinction. Instead, we say certain sentences are grammatical, certain sentences are acceptable. Okay. So all acceptable sentences would be grammatical. Colorless green, not that. Let us say the dogs sleep furiously in the afternoon. Perfectly acceptable sentence. It is also grammatical. So any acceptable sentence is grammatical. But any grammatical sentence need not be acceptable. Okay. So this is an extreme example. I can give you even easier examples. Okay. Like, for example, വലിയ വെള്ളത്തിൽ കാലിട്ട് നിൽക്കരുത് കേട്ടോ. സോ വലിയ വെള്ളം ലുക്സ് അൺആക്സെപ്റ്റബിൾ. അങ്ങനെ പറയും ഇവിടെ. ആഴമുള്ള വെള്ളം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ കലങ്ങിയ വെള്ളം. സോ ദി ലെക്സിൻ വേർഡ് വലിയ is not collocated with വെള്ളം. So we don't accept it as normal, grammatical. Okay, there are plenty of such examples in our languages. മലയാളം എടുത്താലും ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് എടുത്താലും നല്ല ഉദാഹരണങ്ങളുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ when you are submitting your dissertation, you are talking about your dissertation, you don't say മധുരമുള്ളൊരു ഡെസിറ്റേഷനാണ്. Except in rare cases, if you want to make a, let us say, if you want to use a figure of speech, if you want to speak metaphorically, okay, yes, you don't say that, okay. Then dissertation വായിക്കാം കൊള്ളാം, okay, fine. All these words are acceptable, okay. And if you answer, എൻ്റെ ഡെസ്റ്റിനേഷൻ തിന്നാൻ കൊള്ളുന്നതാണ്, this is unacceptable except if you use it metaphorically. അതല്ല പുസ്തകം തിന്നുന്നവരെന്ന് അറിയില്ലേ. അപ്പോൾ അങ്ങനെ നോക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ the idea of acceptability and grammaticality has to be qualified, അല്ലേ? സാധാരണഗതിയിൽ നമ്മൾ അംഗീകരിക്കാത്ത, what we don't accept as acceptable, sometimes we accept. But colorless green ideas sleep furiously appears to be unacceptable. Similarly, രണ്ടുപേരും കൂടി ഡെസർട്ടേഷൻ തിന്നു is unacceptable. But if it is used metaphorically, പുസ്തകം തിന്നുക എന്ന് പറയില്ലേ, Pustakapulu, you call people who go on reading books, then it's acceptable. This acceptability and grammaticality duo is completely context related. നമ്മുടെ സാമൂഹികമായ ചുറ്റുപാടിൽ അംഗീകരിക്കപ്പെടുന്നതാണ് acceptable. So usage is important, okay, which changes from time to time. Okay, you can even talk about ideas. Your ideas sleep furiously, I find, which means you haven't used your ideas. It has not been disseminated in public. Acceptable. And Chomsky, I believe, also had something called bad sentences, acceptable sentences, dubious sentences. Okay. അയാളെ ഞാനൊരു വിഡ്ഢിയായി കണക്കാക്കുന്നു, അയാളെ ഞാനൊരു വിഡ്ഢിയായി കരുതുന്നു, അയാളെ ഞാനൊരു വിഡ്ഢിയായി ആലോചിക്കുന്നു, അയാളെ ഞാനൊരു വിഡ്ഢിയായി വിചാരിക്കുന്നു, അയാളെ ഞാനൊരു വിഡ്ഢിയായി സ്വപ്നം കാണുന്നു, അയാളെ ഞാനൊരു വിഡ്ഢിയായി മാറ്റി നിർത്തുന്നു. All these sentences. I have given you 6 sentences. Some of these sentences are a little doubtful, dubious, you can say. So I think Chomsky uses this as one of them can be called a bad sentence. But remember, all these are relative. So Chomskyan grammar has such problems also. And again, you heard of Chomsky saying that people have an intuitive understanding of language. Correct. If you ask me if I consider a sentence right, I'll immediately give you a reply. ശരിയാണ് സർ, കുഴപ്പമില്ലല്ലോ. You have given me a reply in class. But remember, this is relative. So Chomsky tied this intuitive power with educated speakers. This is dangerous. Even uneducated people use language. There must be a core of language which is common to educated and uneducated people. This division, this qualification is probably not valid. എല്ലാവർക്കും ഭാഷ അറിയുമല്ലോ. അപ്പം ഞാൻ ശരിയാണ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു തന്നെ പിന്നെ പോലെ somebody unlike me, I'm a teacher at the university, somebody who works in a factory, somebody who is a scientist who doesn't bother about language, a head load worker in the bus stand, നമുക്കൊക്കെ പൊതുവായിട്ടുള്ളതാണ് ഈ ഭാഷ. So instead of saying that only educated speakers have the right to pass judgment on language, or not to say that intuitive power is common to everybody, plus or minus some factors. Okay, നമ്മളിപ്പോൾ പോസ്റ്റ് കൊളോണിയലിസത്തിനെ പറ്റി ചോദിച്ചാൽ ചിലപ്പം അതറിയാത്ത ആൾക്കാർക്ക് പറയാൻ പറ്റില്ല. You can't say whether this term is acceptable or not, right? So that is one issue. And also Chomsky's almost utter disregard for sociolinguistics, that there are differences within a language. There is nothing called a whole language. A philosopher like Bakhtin rejected this idea when he talked about heteroglossia. In any text you will find different kinds of utterances. Okay, people who use different dialects, people who use different registers according to their professions. Everywhere in society you find heteroglossia being applied. Bakhtin would say. Chomsky did not accept this. That's why he said only the speech of educated people should be considered when you talk about people's intuitive powers of understanding language. These are some of the fuzzy issues. But I think basically, I'll recapitulate. What Chomsky was doing was to undermine structuralist linguistics, and instead of that talk about transformational generative grammar, that you look at not just sentence patterns but also the way sentences are being transformed. I forgot to tell you, when you talk about acceptability, one must also think about sentences which are actually used. So traditional language learning seriously had problems. Like you don't normally say, this is my house, this is my father, this is my mother, this is my cousin. So in every textbook you find, when you are learning English or Russian, Vot Kniga, that is a book. No Russian will say a sentence like this. So here also acceptability comes into play, you can say. Chomsky, of course, didn't talk about this aspect of language learning, but probably you can add that. Even if a sentence is fully grammatical, it need not be acceptable. Although Chomsky didn't say so, I would say that acceptability is related to social convention. How a sentence becomes acceptable and how a sentence doesn't become acceptable. Okay. So all these come into news frequently. Like, for example, whether you should say ayal, whether to say ayal is an insult, etc. So one must add to Chomsky linguistics. One must find where it went slightly off tangent, but also recognize Chomsky's fundamental contributions to modern linguistics. I have just summed up certain things. Okay. When you look deeper into all these, especially universal grammar, it's a very interesting idea. You've only got to compare two languages to find which are universal categories and which are individual particular characteristics. So it's a very interesting area, and even if you are not interested in linguistics immediately, you're doing it because it's part of your curriculum, it's part of your requirement. But I hope in course of time, at least a few of you might suddenly develop an interest in this very interesting branch of human knowledge. Thank you.